Well, hello, I'm Ken Trimber, and welcome to the KTA University podcast. Our podcasts are designed to tackle relevant subjects in the fields of fabrication, construction, cleaning, and painting. Our topic today is a comparison of total shop painting with shop and field painting. And our guests today are Doug Reardon. Doug is our operations manager for our steel and concrete group. And Todd. John's the operations manager for our coatings inspection group. And Doug, I understand you're going to be advocating total shop painting.
Yes, I am.
And John, you're going to be advocating shop painting with field finish coating.
That's correct.
Great. Well, let's get started. First question. Assume we have a 3-span overpass bridge that's being fabricated, and the owner has 2 options for painting. One is to apply all 3 coats in the shop, inorganic zinc, epoxy, urethane. The other is to apply the zinc in the shop and the epoxy intermediate and finish in the field. So based on that background and recognizing that in this case we'll have plenty of time for field painting, so we don't have a real tight construction schedule on the field end, what would you recommend? Doug, let's start with you. I know you're interested in total shop painting. Why would that be? And John, feel free to interrupt or challenge what Doug's saying at any time.
Well, I think there's several factors that you need to consider. One is if the bridge is being fabricated at a fabrication shop, most large fabricators are equipped with an internal paint shop. And I think that we would see some reduced cost in moving the bridge from the girders in particular from the fabrication floor over to the paint floor. And that can actually slow the schedule down a bit and yet keep it on track because the product is being finished as new product is being built. I don't want to slight any paint shop only folks, but again, that delivery can take place in stages, as we often see single girders going down the road. Another factor to consider would be the control of ambient conditions. There would be no slowing or loss in the schedule due to inclement weather because the shops we're looking at are totally enclosed and heated in the wintertime. Another item to consider, I would think, would be the access for both the painter, the inspectors that are working on the project itself. There's no rigging involved, so we're able to effectively get the person, whatever their task is, to the substrate in an economical manner, and they have time to do a nice, thorough job to ensure a quality product. For the most part, we see another factor to consider is that the crews at these fabrication and paint shops, and certainly paint shops, they're experienced in handling painted components. So they're using slings versus chokers or chains. They're lifting, they're cribbing properly, using dampeners when they do ship the product out to the field, which in turn reduces that touch-up time in the field. All that being said, once the product gets to the field, I think we're going to see limited field work. So we're going to see touch-up of some areas that were damaged during transport, but they're going to be localized areas. And then we're going to have probably touch-up in a lot of the connection points that are associated with the field erection. When we look at this, I think that you're going to consider that the touch-up will be visible. And I do not disagree with that, but that touch-up will fade and blend in over time. When we look in the field, localized touch-up, it's much less disruptive at the field site than applying a full coat or 2 full coats. And the other considerations are dirt and debris that's accumulated on the substrate that does not need to be cleaned off in between coats. Therefore, we're maintaining our adhesion in between these coats of paint. Last problem would be if we had coatings that were sensitive to long recoat windows. When we painted in the field, in the shop, we would minimize that. That top coat could go on, and we could eliminate that need to be even concerned about that the recoat times there.
Well, John, Doug makes a pretty compelling case for applying all 3 coats on in the shop. How would you counter that, saying the advantages of some coats on in the field?
So I understand Doug's point of the conditions, the access, those sorts of things. I'd like to touch on the access, because you may think that you have limited access in the field. However, you're already going to have access for the erection, the connection. You're going to have to provide the same access for all the touch-up anyways. So I don't think that access is actually a solid argument for the shop painting. My biggest concern with shop painting is the steel fabrication shops is real estate. They have a capacity that they have to operate within. Painting all 3 coats in the shop limits their capacity, because they have steel sitting waiting for the paint to dry versus the next batch of steel being fabricated and out the door. So I think it constrains their schedule. I think it makes them inefficient in that sense. As for the skill in handling of the steel, I don't disagree that the shop may be good at using the slings versus the chains and hooks and that sort, but when they're setting it up in the field, there's still nicks and damages from just from being put together. When you're putting on bolts and connecting the cross frames, those sorts of things, there's going to be nicks and scratches throughout. With all 3 coats being applied, it makes it more difficult for touch-up, and you may not get all the areas touched up accordingly. I think only using the zinc in the shop, the zinc primer in the shop, is better, because it's quicker and more efficient for the shop for their fabrication side of things. But also in the field, you're getting a more thorough, complete painting, or a coat painted. Not to mention aesthetically, as you mentioned here, the aesthetics will be consistent across the bridge. No matter how careful you are, and yes, it may fade, but the finished product looks more patchy than a nice even coat, even on the outside fascias, but just throughout the structure. Other things, the cleaning for the dirt, even during the touch-up on all 3 coats, the cleaning would still occur. So I don't think you're saving anything there. The zinc performs better by itself than with the 3 coats if there's any damage. And then not to mention the recoat times, as you mentioned here. Most zinc systems have a unlimited recoat time.
And this is the inorganic zinc we're talking.
It could.
Okay.
And there's organic zincs that have unlimited recoats as well, but the inorganic, I think, may be best for the shop applied, because it typically has quicker recoat or quicker handling times opposed to the other systems.
So John, you're mentioning productivity is one thing why you're advocating the shop zinc only. Doug, what do you say to that? His comment about productivity. How would you counter that? Can the shops handle 3 coats in the drying times?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to answer that question, and I think the biggest one is how aggressive the overall schedule is on the project. For a fab shop that, let's say, is producing a girder or 2 a week, I would see that could almost disappear. The painting time could almost disappear prior to shop steel delivery to the field. And that's because the shop is not overwhelmed with steel, but rather it's being fed at a given rate, and at given rate the shop would be equipped to handle properly. I think that would be the largest, the biggest part of it. In a more aggressive schedule, I don't disagree that if we went to primer only, that we can move the steel out of the shop quicker. But then again, there's a full field coat that needs to be done for at least 1 coat.
Okay, so scheduling could be an issue, and it depends on the job. or how much work is in the shop. What about the quality of the paint? I'm hearing, Doug, you're saying we get much better quality job of all 3 coats in controlled shop conditions. John, you're saying that you'd prefer to see continuous coats in the field because with so many touch-up areas, I gather there can be lots of potentially miles of feathering and things at all the touch-up areas that might overcome the benefit of 3 coats in the shop. So what do you think, Doug? You still advocate the quality aspect of all shop painting?
Well, certainly the aesthetics. I guess there's a technically right coating system and then an aesthetically pleasing coating system. And I think that yes, we could have some, let's not talk about the fascia beams, but underneath the bridge where we don't have the public really viewing it as much. And perhaps there is more of a tolerance there towards being able to see some touch-up areas. And on fascia beams, if it's a sensitive area and a sensitive job, that the aesthetics have to be more improved, then perhaps there is a full top coat that is applied in the field on the outside of the fascia.
So you're looking at a combination.
Mm-hmm.
And John, in terms of that, can you control the quality pretty well in the field if you're applying 2 coats in the field with all the dust conditions and typical outdoor weather?
I believe you can. I do believe that Doug has a valid point in some of the ambient conditions being more controlled in the shop than the field. But the field itself can be controlled. You can build a containment just like you normally would for a full removal on a maintenance side, and control the dust and the cleaning and the painting as well. So I don't think that is too much of a concern. In the shop, with access as well as the cribbing that you mentioned earlier, it may prevent the painter proper access from getting difficult to so on a girder, the bottom flange, that it would be difficult because of a tight space. If they couldn't do that all at one time, that's more time for them painting in the shop, so that could even further reduce the schedule. But I think quality-wise in the field, I don't think there's much of a I think you'd still get the same quality.
Okay. Let me ask another quality question. Doug, the question is inorganic zinc, and we know that inorganic zinc can have some challenges curing if you don't have adequate moisture in the air and so forth. So if I'm working in a shop, let's say in the winter time, and I know it's cold, so my humidity's down, with John's approach, only putting the zinc on, no problem, ship her out. But in your case, that could potentially extend the time required. What about that? Can that be accommodated quickly, overcutting the inorganic zinc, or is that a problem with total shop painting?
Well, I've seen a couple different solutions to that problem, and that's been at a couple of shops that I've been to. They've had heated floors. They simply have come in and put lawn sprinklers in the middle of the base and turned them on, raised the humidity on the floor after priming has been completed, and we're able to keep that temperature, that humidity level up during the curing process.
Okay.
So that's a technique, as well as spraying the steel down with water, following priming. But again, let me just go back to, if you're seeing you're not seeing 10 girders arrive at the shop and trying to push 10 girders through in a schedule. You're seeing a more controlled feed coming out of the fabrication shop. And because of that, I think that there is time that we can have at the fabrication paint shop that allows for a proper curing of the inorganic zinc.
All right, now let me change on you, John. Let's say that we have the same scenario, simple 3-span overpass bridge, so it's not a big throughput, as Doug said. Organic zinc. Let's say I change it to organic zinc. Does that change your thinking at all?
It doesn't. I think it still performs similar enough for the shop's aspect. May reduce some handling time, or may lengthen the handling time from application to being able to move the steel. But I think at the end of the day, it still doesn't change my opinion.
What about recoating? You mentioned inorganic zinc, almost unlimited. Organic zinc. At some point, it's going to have a limitation. Maybe a year. It could be. What about that? Does that affect your
I guess it would depend on the schedule. So if you have depending on how long from the time of fabrication to the time of being erected in the field and being able to apply the next coat of paint, that all has to be considered.
Okay, so if it's sitting out in the field longer, you may not want to go with primer only. You might go with all the coats in the shop, if that were the case.
Quite possibly.
For the organic.
Yes.
Doug, any change in your thinking if it's organic zinc?
No, I don't think that there's that much of a change. Again, I do agree with John that it's going to lengthen handling time in the shop. But again, if we bring that material into the shop and we have it set up and ready to coat, we're still looking at probably the next day of recoating at some time, the next coat. So I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact at all.
All right, let's change to a building then. Let's assume that the architect has built a complex building structure with a domed open atrium area with a lot of shapes and connection points. Let's go with inorganic zinc epoxy urethane again. Let's just stick with that. So aesthetics is going to be very important. There's also a lot of connection areas. John, I'm going to start with you. Would you go still shop priming, field finish coating in that scenario?
I would, because the complexity of it, there would be multiple points of touch-up when you're installing this. That all the connection points would mean even more touch-up, more extensive. It'd be more difficult to find all the areas and touch them up accordingly. Not to mention being such an aesthetic portion, or the aesthetics being such a big part of this project. I would say that you'd be more apt to do the full coat in the finish, or I'm sorry, in the field, so that it was all consistent.
And what about overspray and dry spray with all these kind of configured steel? Does that cause you concern?
It doesn't. There's ways of minimizing it. I mean, the applicator could use drop cloths or Visqueen to protect the lower levels from overspray.
Okay, what about on the pieces themselves? I'm painting one angle and behind there's another angle and maybe getting overspray.
Well, sure, there will always be that, but I mean, again, there's ways for the contractor to minimize to minimize that impact.
Okay. Doug, what about your thoughts?
Well, you almost took part of my answer there with the complex configuration and then the overspray and dry spray on adjacent pieces. I still think that shop painting is the way to go. You're still getting better coverage. I think you'll see a reduction in cost because of the quickness to get all the coats of paint on prior to the erection. And I do, yes, I think that there will be more touch-up, but that touch-up will be minimalized in the fact that the crews, I think when they're working with these smaller pieces, and I'm kind of trying to imagine what we're looking at here, but I think that we're looking at touching up ends only, not necessarily out in the middle of the spans.
So in terms of aesthetics, because there is a lot of touch-up, does that cause you concern, Doug? I mean, since it's important in this particular architectural element that we know touch-up will never blend exactly. You're saying it might fade in time. I agree, outdoor and UV. Indoors, it probably won't see that benefit.
Right.
Does that change your thinking?
Well, it does change my thinking. And when you put the question that way, yes, perhaps then it would be smart if we had a 3-coat system, perhaps to put 2 coats of paint on with the top
In the shop.
In the shop, with the top coat being a field applied. That way we would have the aesthetic value that we're looking for, and yet we still get that coverage and we get that quality because we've got many smaller parts that's easier to paint and certainly easier to inspect.
Okay, good. Well, how about some closing remarks? John, I'll start with you.
Again, I will just kind of reiterate that I believe the steel fab shops may not be the best place to apply all the coatings because it reduces their efficiencies. The field touch-up may be so extensive that it outweighs the benefits of shop applying the 3 coats. Again, steel shops have real estate constraints. They need, and applying more paint with the recoat times and potentially multiple applications from tops and bottoms, would really lengthen their schedule. May not be as much of a cost savings as once previously thought. You'll still have to do cleaning in the field, the pressure washing to remove the dirt for the touch-up, and there may be extensive touch-up that again outweighs the cost benefit of the shop applied.
Okay, Doug?
Well, I think there's a few items to consider. One is that by painting all three coats in the shop, I think we have better access to the steel and therefore a better quality product coming out the door. I think the other thing is we have a quicker field completion for our project, in the fact that the components are coming out. Now we're just performing touch-up. I think there's some cost savings associated with coating only in the shop. And I think really it's going to come down at the end of the day that the choice is either by the owner or the erection contractor on those cost savings. What I would suggest, though, is that we certainly, that those parties would communicate prior to being in the middle of the stream, so to say, when they think that there's a problem at hand. So I think communication would be a key to making sure that the project was successful.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I guess just to summarize, I've taken some notes here. What I've heard is, in terms of total shop painting, there's less time required in the field, although curing times in the shop may impact schedule a little bit. Better access in the shop for cleaning and painting for the most part, although you can still have good access in the field, but I think arguably there's a little better access. But more care is going to be required during shipping and handling and erection to avoid damage, to minimize the amount of touch-up that you won't have if you are putting a few coats on in the field. Another comment I heard was discontinuous film, or more potential for discontinuous finish, with a lot of edges at repaired areas being feathered and being tied together. Won't be quite as continuous a film, and the touch-up will be visible, although, as Doug said, I think it will in fact fade over time, but it depends on the importance of aesthetics. And I think Doug mentioned, if that were the concern, maybe on a bridge, the underside where it's not visible to the public. If the touch-up is visible, it doesn't really matter. But in the fascia, you may want to apply a full coat to avoid that appearance. In terms of shop prime and field finish coats, I heard quite a bit on shop storage capacity and real estate. I think it's a valid point, and productivity, getting the steel out the door to meet schedules. Potential challenges for good cleaning and painting in the field, although there are good means of access and containment available to address those types of things. If you're only putting one coat on in the shop, you don't have to be quite as meticulous in handling and erection. You can tolerate perhaps a little more damage, and again, this kind of seamless finish. So sounds like in the end, both approaches do a good job protecting the steel from corrosion, and there's no single approach or one size fits all. It really, the pros and cons need to be evaluated on a project-specific basis. So that ends this podcast. Please log on to KTA University for other podcasts and other technical articles that address fabrication and construction and cleaning and painting, any issues related to those subjects. Thank you.